Have you ever thought about therapy but worried about what other people will think about you? Maybe for you it still holds some kind of stigma, or potentially you think that other people will think you're strange because you're having therapy or coaching. If so, we're going to be discussing all this and more with my lovely guest today. Hi, I'm Amit, Sodha, Holistic Love Coach, and welcome to the Feel Inspired podcast. I think therapy is something which is definitely far more acceptable than it ever used to be. And I find even in my own coaching practice, I get a lot more men. In fact, I've got one gentleman who's just signed up with me today. And it's great to see that as well. But previously, in the past, it was all women. But now I'm seeing more and more men actually embrace the idea of getting coaching, getting therapy, and using it as a tool to enhance themselves, to grow, to develop, to improve, whatever word you want to attach to it. But I find more and more people are doing that. But is it something that has lingered on your mind? So I'm going to chat about this with my lovely guest today. I'm going to let her introduce herself in just a moment. But before we do, I have a little tradition on my podcast. For anyone who doesn't know, these are the Feel Inspired, beg your pardon, no, they're not. They are the Spark Conversations cards that I created. And they're there as a tool if you're, for example, dating, or maybe even just for any other purpose with your family, want to initiate deeper conversations. It's a great way to do so because these are a standard pack of 52 playing cards and every card has a question on there. So right now, I'm going to ask the lovely guest to say stop whenever you want.
Stop.
Oh, that was quite an early one. Oh, okay. Interesting one. I wonder what this says about you in your field, right? So the question is, if you were a dessert, which one would you be and why?
Oh, crikey. Dessert. Bowl of fruit. Bowl of mixed fruit.
Mixed fruit. That's a great dessert to have.
Cut
So
fruit.
what do you think that says about you, the fact you've chosen mixed fruit?
So to tie in with your question, to say, a question for you in line with what you do, part of the work that I really love is parts theory, Dick Schwartz, internal family systems. And he refers to us as having all of these different parts and how they all serve a purpose. And actually all these little different pieces of cut fruit
Nice.
good for us in different ways, right?
I love that as well because I often talk about this with my clients in terms of, I have a slightly different phrase, terminology for it, but I define it as soul versus role. Our soul is who we are as our core. Our role is who we play in each different scenario, whether at work, with family, with friends, with professional settings, with clients, etc., etc. The list goes on. But we have all these roles that we play, and this is one of the things I encourage people to do is embrace these roles that we take on even when we're dating in relationships. They are a fundamental tenet of who we are, and it doesn't necessarily mean you're faking or anything like that. And I think this is something that can get easily confused, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. So I love that. I love that answer, by the way. But before we go any further, of course, who the hell are you? What the hell are you sitting on my couch?
Why are you here?
Invaded my podcast studio.
Where did you come from, India Gill?
Please tell everyone who you are and what you do, and let's go from there.
Right, I'm going to start with something I'm really proud of this year. And I've never been one for birthdays, right?
Yeah.
Not bothered about celebrating my birthday. But I turned 60 this January.
Wow.
And it just hit different. And any opportunity I get, I'm like, I'm 60. I'm 60. Like, if you look at my social media.
Can I just say, you do not remotely look 60. And that's incredible.
Hair dye.
We've got to talk about this too, like your secret to wellness.
Hair dye. If I did not have hair dye, I would not look younger than 60.
I would beg to differ. I bet there's a lot within your personality that dictates that you look so young.
Well, do you know, I think the way we feel about ourselves, the way we live our lives, really impacts that. And there's an old saying, isn't there, with the English, they say you can tell how, this might be a little bit sexist in this day and age, it's an old saying, I caveat that. So they say you can tell how a man treats his woman when you look at her face. It's reflected in her face.
Nice.
Right? And we can tell.
I don't think it's sexist at all.
And to a large degree, we can tell by looking at someone what their life's been like, without all of the aesthetics and minus all of that.
Lovely. So I'd love for you to tell everyone a bit more about what it is you do specifically in your profession and your day-to-day, some of the perhaps things you see in this day and age that is a common theme, some of the challenges perhaps people face or anything of the like.
Okay, so I'll rewind and go back to actually answering the question that you asked. First of all, what do I do? Why am I here? So I'm a psychotherapist. I got into therapy late in life, didn't do my psychology degree even until my 40s. Now I run a thriving private practice. So how did I start? So I came into this field. Do you know they say it's like spirituality. We turn to spirituality through inspiration or desperation. And I think it was kind of similar for me with the psychotherapy. I had a question. I got divorced in my 30s. So almost 30 years ago now. And I had this question. I was like, why do people do what they do? And I didn't find an answer to it. I did my psychology degree, didn't answer my question. So then I went on to do various courses and self-development and you know how we self-help books, all of that. And it was my question morphed into, why do I do what I do? And, really started to introspect what's my role in all of this. And that's what really led me into this therapy journey. And I started my life working with rape crisis. So I'm trauma trained. So I worked with them just up until recently, actually. And that was amazing working with their complex clients. It was males, females, and even children. I used to go into schools and visit children who had recent or historic sexual abuse. Then I went on to, I also work with a domestic violence agency at the moment with males and females because, we don't equate males with that, do we? A lot of the time. What else have I done? I work in the music industry, which has been just quite serendipitously. A fellow therapist of mine was working in the industry. I looked into it, had an interview, started working for an agency. And so I have a cohort of clients with them and I love what I do. And I think when you love what you do, whether you're a cleaner, whether you're a neuroscientist, whether you're a podcaster, whether you're whatever line of work you're in, if you're really passionate about it, if you do it, and even if you're not, if you do it to the best of your ability, I think we just never know who's watching. And it doesn't matter who's watching. We want to do whatever we do, like you with your clients. You want to give them the best service that you possibly can, have their best interests at heart. So just through doing my work, I got recommended by this agency to someone else. They called me and said, hey, we're starting a new initiative. All these big festivals that they have around the country, Download, the Truck Festival, Shambhala, all of that kind of thing. We're looking for a therapist. We're trialling it. We're looking for a therapist and then you'll have a support team around you. And so I'll be doing that as of this summer. And literally not even through courting it, looking for it, didn't even know such a thing existed. Well, it doesn't. They're just introducing it, which I think is amazing because I think the music industry is really picking up on the fact that, a lot of their clients, have therapy, need therapy, have, substance misuse in the music industry has been really glamorized in the past, as we know. I mean, just think of Rolling Stones and, those types of bands. But there's usually a price to pay if it's long term. So that's another field I've worked in, which is handy because I worked in substance misuse recovery in criminal justice, worked in prisons, actually visiting people in prison and when they came out, whether they're working with probation or in group work. I hold a mindfulness group, which I started when I was working with substance misuse recovery clients when they're at the tail end of their journey. I'm sure I'm missing something. I've just set up a provision across a trust of schools. I was based in Harrow. That was really interesting. Really interesting because it was a faith-based school. And so I worked with a lot of, children from the Asian community, and that was really an eye-opener. And a passion. It was a labour of love more than anything.
Nice.
So I think, and obviously I run my private practice with all of this, and that, I think, covers kind of what I do.
It's interesting that you started off with probably one of the most fundamental tenets, I think, of human existence, and that was the why. Obviously, Simon Sinek has his lovely book out called Start With Why. But I remember Tony Robbins' TED Talk from many years ago where he talks about this. He goes, most people think of me as the motivation guy, but I'm actually the why guy. I like to find out why people do what they do. And so when you went on this journey for yourself, what was the why? Was it inspiration or desperation?
It was desperation because, as I said, I was asking, why do people do what they do? I'd come out of this wonderful marriage, overall. But then when I wanted the divorce, and then I was suddenly, the one moment I'm the best thing since sliced bread, and the next minute I'm totally demonized. And so I was thinking, why do people do that? What they do? Like, what's going on here? How does that happen? And I guess today I'm able to answer that.
Yeah.
So I have a diploma in attachment theory, applying attachment into clinical practice. So that was really helpful and person-centered. So the client leads the way. I never take them anywhere they don't want to go. A lot of clients will come to me and it will be like, oh, don't you need me to talk about that? But my last therapist said, I have to talk about the trauma. And the way I practice and have been trained is like, no, you never have to talk about anything you're not ready to talk about, because the last thing we want to do in therapy is to re-traumatize you. But once we have that psychological contact, once we create that, have that therapeutic relationship, which sometimes doesn't happen straight away, that's the vehicle through which the work gets done, as Carl Rogers, would say. So, yeah.
And so are you seeing any trends right now in your practice or anywhere else about maybe changes in terms of, demographics, people who are coming to see you, whether there is a shift in whether it's more women, more men, and also as well, like what are the big things you're seeing right now, especially right now in 2025, that are the big talking points for people? What are people coming to you about?
Dating is one of the things. What are people coming about? Shall I start there? So with a lot of teenagers, it's depression, anxiety, self-harm, eating disorders, I think would be right there at the top. But as regards the demographic, it is changing, because I didn't have any Indian clients. And then I had one about 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I had a male Indian client. He was referred to me by an agency, and I was like, oh, he was a bit wary of me, funnily enough.
Yeah.
And once we had the therapeutic relationship in place, he did actually say to me, he said, so I used to do some modelling. And he said, well, I've Googled you, and I didn't know, hadn't Googled myself up until then. I didn't know that kind of, some of my modelling shots were on there. And he said, and I was wondering what your motivation is. You're a psychotherapist, or are you a model? So I was like, could I not be both? Right? And I think another thing he was wary of was judgment, because his experience had been, and how old was he? I think he would have been in his late 30s, early 40s. And his experience had been, and plus it came out later in therapy that, he was homosexual, which, neither here nor there in therapy, but for him and the community he was from, I think he'd experienced a lot of judgment in other areas, and so was really wary. Oh, this is a Indian female therapist, and was I going to bring that? So I reassured him. And confidentiality is another thing that people really are not sure of. So I reiterate that again and again, and I find that I have to reiterate it with our Indian community more than I do with others. So I'd never had a male Asian, or had never had an Asian client up until then.
Yeah.
And the change has been that now, how long has this been going on? For the last, 2 years, I've actually got people coming to me specifically because I am Indian, because I'm culturally aware.
Yeah.
Or because you'll understand. And I notice a lot of the teenagers in school, in the faith-based school, used to say, oh, you just get it. And so-and-so doesn't get it. Because they don't have to explain that to me. I'm an Indian. I've been an Indian child, daughter, wife, ex-wife, sister, an adult, mother. So I know the Indian community. I am the Indian community. However, in practice, and in my personal life, I like to think to the most degree, but definitely in practice, there's unconditional positive regard, no matter what you bring. Okay, there's absolutely no space for judgment in my therapy room, and there shouldn't be in anyone's therapy room. And even if, I want to be of service to my clients. So if we're going through, which happens with some clients because they're not quite ready to talk yet, we're just talking about their day, and this goes on for a few sessions. I'll say to them, because I do work in a challenging way, if my client wants me to, I'll say, do you want me to work in a slightly more challenging way? And if they're okay with it, then I'll gently ease my way in by saying, well, what do you think your part is in this? I'm working with a really high profile client at the moment, and she doesn't have, I'm always going to say I can't think of one good relationship that she has. And from the way that she expresses herself, beautiful woman, actually even aesthetically, probably one of the most beautiful women I've ever met, has everything that money can buy. Like she has this on looking from the outside in, she has this perfect life. But actually, very, very lonely, very fractured, and not able to maintain good relationships. And so I just said, I wonder what your part is in this. And this is so many sessions in where she really knows that, you know what, there is no judgment here. I have your best interests in heart, but we do have to introspect as well, which has been a huge part of my journey because, you know, I am that chick who used to have the anger issues. I am that judgmental, you know, girl of yesteryear. And if I went back to visit that version of me 10 years ago, and even that version of me 20 years ago, I just want to go back and give them a big hug and say, do you know what? And I love this phrase. We do what we know with the information we have available to us at that time, right? And
it's like fundamental part of NLP. We talk about that, right?
Absolutely. It's imperative. And this is when a lot of people, because I work with attachment, so I use Mary Stranger's questions from her attachment interview. And they go back to your formative years. And it's about, you know, your primary caregivers, who you grew up with and all of this. And people will say, oh, no, but, you know, she was a good mum. And, oh, no, but yeah. And I'm like, we're not sitting here to actually cast any blame anywhere, but just to understand. And and that's become actually my own personal signature that just since last year, I say lead with love. That came from a conversation I had with this doctor of philosophy and ethics. And then approach with curiosity, with a view to understand. And I think when we do that, even in our personal relationships, you know, just me meeting you today, it's kind of like you might come at me with something and I'll just take a pause. Another quote that you all know comes to mind, Viktor Frankl, love it. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our power, freedom. Is it power? Freedom to
choose. I think it's
respond.
Freedom. Is it? I forget now as well. But that was actually my fundamental quote that I lived by for many, many years.
I love it. And in that response lies our power to grow. And evolve. And actually, I used to use that with my clients in substance misuse because a lot of them can be quite chaotic. And one of the things that I was trained in is the SOBA acronym, which ties in with substance misuse. But I used to use in schools, especially with, you know, the kids who had anger issues, and I'd have it on my whiteboard in my office, and that Viktor Frankl quote. And I'd say, do you see the stimulus is when someone's shouting at you, or, you know, whatever happens, and your response is you, but you just go, and then there's dysregulation coming at you. You just, you know, respond in a dysregulated way, and wow, there's an explosion. So between stimulus, the triggering event, the activating event, and response, that's your response, there is a space. And I use the SOBA acronym, just popped it in. That's how we create the space. And I love it. And one of my clients, I'll never forget her. She was a very disorganized attachment style and had extreme trauma since she was a child in her life. And she said to me at the end of therapy, do you know what, India? The one thing that you've given me, which I didn't even know I didn't have, is hope. And the most useful thing to her was that SOBA acronym. Out of all of that therapy that we had, she said, I printed it out, I stuck it on my fridge, and I went through it every single day. So what it is S is for stop. Just stop when, you know, just say someone's come in and shouting at you or whatever's happened. Just stop, take a minute. O, observe. Okay, so what's going on for me? Like, how is that impacting me somatically, you know, viscerally? How am I feeling? B, breathe, you know, so you regulate your central nervous system through breath work. So just take a breath, do a bit of box breathing, or just inhale deeply and exhale. So that will calm you a little bit. And then let's see, there's a science behind all of it. So that's the B, SOBE, expand, expand your awareness around this. Okay, so wonder why they're being like that. And just take in the situation in entirety. And then where you would have initially reacted, reaction's gone, and now we're able to respond. To see between stimulus and response.
There is a gap.
Space.
And in your gap, you put SOBA.
I put SOBA. So I kind of borrow from, so my therapy is obviously evidence-based, but if my client is open to it, you know, if they're talking to me about the universe and yoga and meditation, etc., I think I will bring in the spiritual, because I think, for me, I'm a very spiritual person, I like to think. And sometimes that's the component that's missing. We really concentrate on the physical, right? We're all members of gyms, whether we go or not, we're a member of a gym. We know that it's important to look after our physical health. We didn't really put that emphasis on mental health. It was like mental health and therapy was, for a certain type of person. Now it's more accessible.
Yeah. So let's unpack some of this, because there's a lot you've said, I think, and we've covered a lot already.
Sorry.
No, in a good way, in a really good way. And it's so much, so many different directions we could go down in each of these things you said. Yeah. And there are some things that cropped up in me, which I think are really important, that whether we get time to discuss today or not, doesn't matter, but let's talk about them. One, it's interesting you talk about, the Indian mentality and, the cultural side of therapy. Something I've seen shift, I would say, in the last sort of at least minimum 5, but possibly 10 years. And what I see, though, on social media from the youngsters' point of view, we're talking sort of like Gen Zs, not so much as Gen Alphas yet, but I'm sure that will potentially be the case. But a lot of Gen Zs, millennials as well, talking about a phrase we like to throw around right now, which is generational trauma. And I think they tend to conflate that with kind of passed down cultural ideologies, and I think that's what it is more. So something we could potentially talk about at some point, whether we get to it today or not. But I loved what you talked about in terms of the whole stimulus response, the space thing. It's interesting because I was watching a podcast today with this neuroscientist, and she was talking about actually that the brain is a prediction machine, and so we actually end up sometimes, in a way, pre-creating these reactions through the fact that our brain is predicting this outcome to happen. And so we're actually making it happen before we even get there. So a good example of this would be anxiety. And we already start to create the feeling, create the exact conditions of that anxiety before anything has even happened. And, this is one of the things we live with in this day and age. And, it totally ties in with everything you said. And I think that because most of us are going so fast, of which we know anxiety is such a huge component, that our thoughts are racing, which is going at 200 miles an hour. So we never have time for that little space, that spot, that gap that we're able to process, respond, not react, not be so reactive to everything that happens to us. I mean, oh, God knows, we all do it. I react. We all are, going through our various stages of life, growth, learning, developing, but we just very rarely take the time to pause and process and really sort of start to look. And even in the dating world, I see it so often as well. What happens is we see people, they'll go from one dating experience to another, and it's a replica. Each one is a replica of the previous one, because they've not taken any time to process what happened. And the important bit that you said that I want to come to as well, which is my accountability, my role in this. They never, and I'm not saying this to be insulting to anyone, to say that they're doing something wrong. It's just that we probably weren't equipped with the skill to look at our role in the process, the outcome, that we never really actually sort of thought about. Because there's an interesting thing that I wanted to just mention as well, and there's a clip, and I will share this with you after this, and maybe I can share it in the podcast. But it was Gabor Mate on Mel Robbins' podcast. Yeah, me too. He's incredible. And he was talking to her about her experience of where she was abused as a youngster, where she woke up one night and a guy's on top of her, fondling her, doing all this stuff. So she opened up about it. And he said, should we unpack this? Should we talk about this? And it was interesting what she said. I'm not going to be able to articulate this as well as if you just watch it, but I'm going to try. So he asked her, he said, okay, so what happened? This guy got on top of you. He physically abused you. Did you tell anyone? And she goes, no. I for the longest time, I held on to, kept it a secret. And he said, so, who do you wish you could have told? She said, her mum. So why couldn't you tell your mum? I didn't feel safe. So the trauma actually began way before. And because abusers can pick up on these things, abusers have a laser-like ability to pick up on those who are in a position that don't feel safe, that they feel vulnerable. And so he was able to pick up on this with her. So he said this started way before he ever got on top of you. And it was the way he did it was so powerful, so impactful. And it really makes you think about every level of it. And that includes the part of my responsibility and everything. I know with my wife, I'm quite irritable at times. I can be, I mean, if that's the worst thing about
Amit.
no, yeah, no, if that's the worst thing about me, I mean, there's a lot more terrible things I could be. But I know I'm a little bit when I'm in my mood and just having an off day, it tends to come out in irritable snaps. That's my sort of way of coping mechanism or response mechanism to whatever's going on. And so that's how I react. And when I'm in that reactive stage, that's how it emerges from me. But then there's days when I can sort of sit back and just think to myself, no, I'm not going to react today because I'm going slower. I'm going a slow pace. I'm in a place where I can actually think, process, And
you've set the
observe.
intention. I'm not going to react today.
Metacognition, going behind the thought and realizing, I don't have to react. I don't have to think that way. It's a choice. I'm choosing to react that way. I'm choosing to allow a pattern to continue is a choice, still a choice. But ultimately I can interrupt it if I want to. It takes work. It's not just like a quick thing. But yeah, so there was so much to unpack. And then the last thing you mentioned was about obviously your skills and expertise in attachment, which I'd love to get to because that's a big thing right now. And it's a big hot topic for me at the moment, I think, because I'm seeing so many more of these coming out of the woodwork. So maybe we can just digress ever so slightly to the attachment side. And again, I know you said you wanted to ask me a question as well. So I'm ready for it. But let's talk about this because it's such a huge thing right now. I talked about when I was filming earlier, talking about the anxious avoidant loop. But let's hear your expert take on it. What you see, what happens, what are the patterns, what are we looking out for, where does it come from, what do people need to become aware of, what space do they need to create so they can learn to interrupt this pattern, respond?
So I think it's very important to know your attachment style. Attachment's been around forever, since time immemorial. We get our attachment style. It's formed in our early years. From the moment I'd say we're in utero almost, but especially, 0 to 2.
Yeah.
So when you're a baby, babies when they're born, they're in survival mode. So when I say that, they can't do anything for themselves. So, they cry and let it be known that they're hungry, that they need changing, that they're in pain, that they, want to be picked up and cuddled. So that's their only form of communication. Before, when we're born, we're visceral, but we're not cognitive. So the cognitive function is developed later, but we're born feeling, right? So when a baby knows it needs to be changed or when it's hungry, it can feel that and it vocalizes it. So, and we're very huge, and we always have been on, don't drink when you're pregnant, don't have alcohol when you're pregnant. I'm just like taking it back a step before I explain the attachment styles. But even the stress that the mother is ingesting is going through to the child. It penetrates that embryo. So you can have, and it's funny, there's been research done in this, and if you're very, very stressed, there's a lot going on in your life when you are pregnant, there's more chance that your child will be a bit anxious when it's born, will be a bit more colicky, a little bit, not as easy to settle. So I think it's really important for us to start taking note of this way before a child is even born. When a child is born, just say you've got baby Gurpreet here. So there are 4 attachment styles. Secure, I call it the gold standard. That's not what it's called in the industry. That's just a me thing, okay? Because all attachment styles, are born for a reason. So secure attachment, gold standard, and that's the secure. And on the insecure spectrum, there sits avoidant, fearful, avoidant, dismissive. We'll just call it avoidant for ease. Then there's the anxious, and then we've got disorganized. So to go back to this baby Gurpreet, baby's born, mum and dad respond to baby Gurpreet in a timely and appropriate fashion when he cries, when, he's hungry, and it's just... So when baby Gurpreet grows up, well, let's take it to the dating context, and he is dating and he's messaged his partner. Partner hasn't responded. It's been a couple of hours. Okay, fine. So when the evening when they speak, it's just fine. Everything's secure and they can have a nice, gentle conversation. So that's secure, okay? Then we have Leo, who's avoidant. Now, how an avoidant attachment style can come to be is baby Leo is crying, etc. But it's kind of like, oh, let baby... Do you remember there used to be this old way of thinking like, oh, it's good for the baby to cry. Exercises their lungs. Let them cry. Don't tend to them immediately. Let them cry for a little bit. And then let's just say, and this starts from baby, but even just say he's 2 years old and he falls down on the gravel, and mum and dad might be brush the knees off and say, there's my little soldier, you're going to be fine. And so what baby Leo learns at this point is, oh, mummy and daddy are proud of me when I don't cry, when I don't show my emotions, right? Anyhow, fast forward to when he's a teenager and he's dating. So he texts his partner doesn't come back, I don't know, till that evening. And then they try it when they do meet, they're like, oh, sorry, I didn't respond to you. I was busy in meetings, etc., or doing my homework, whatever. But this is fine because they don't want to show their emotions. They don't want to show that they're concerned or that, if I was a little bit worried. That's not the way they function. So they'll be like, yeah, that's fine. No problem. And it's not a problem. And they just move on. Then we have, I don't know, what's your attachment style?
No, I'd say I'm secure.
You'd say super secure, yeah. Okay, so then there's this other
But if you want to know before I land.
Yeah. Same.
Before I
was gonna
became
ask you
secure,
that,
I would say, looking back at my history of dating, at first I thought I had an anxious attachment style. With deeper insight, I realized actually I was disorganized, which meant I had a good flavor of both anxious and avoidant. So I had a good dose of both.
Okay, and it doesn't have to be one or the other.
Yeah.
Like, you can have an avoidant with a nice helping of anxious on the side. So then with anxious babies, so babies there, parents will respond sometimes they don't, sometimes they're just like, very much there and cuddling and cooing, and other times they're not present, whether it's through work or whatever it is. So this baby's kind of like got a little bit of an abandonment thing going. It doesn't know when mummy's going to come back, if mummy's going to come back. And so now when they're dating, and I see this a lot, and there's a real marrying of the avoidant and the anxious and how they attract each other. So with the anxious teenager, say, or young person, they're dating, they message their partner doesn't respond, then they message them again, partner doesn't respond for whatever reason. We lead busy lives. I don't check my phone for days at a time sometimes. So they get really anxious, or they'll phone them 5 times, 6 times, and they get really anxious. Oh my God, they're going to leave me. Oh, I wonder if they're seeing. So all of this insecurity and that original sense of abandonment and rejection potentially is there. So that's them. Then you have this little baby. This makes me the saddest, and I work with a huge cohort of these clients, especially when because I work in trauma. So a disorganized attachment style, you're a baby, your parents might, I'm going to take some extreme cases, might have substance misuse issues, or they might just be quite aggressive when they tend to baby. Why can't you just shut up? Or, all this kind of thing. And then other times, obviously, they're being fed, they're being nurtured, but it can be quite chaotic in that household.
There's no consistency there, is there?
Absolutely none. They don't know what to expect. So when this disorganized attachment style, when this teenager starts to date, there's a real push-pull. There's a real kind of like, I hate you, come back. Or, I love you, go away. It's, and it can be quite complex. And they do tend to present with, and I don't really like this label, with EUPD when they come to me quite a lot. They've been diagnosed with emotionally unstable personality disorder. And I recall this, so to see how important attachment styles are, and then we take that into all of our relationships, all of them, our relationship with self, I had a client just yesterday, a 16-year-old I'm working with. And we were talking about her what she was talking about her attachment, because kids are really up on attachment. It must be all over TikTok or I don't know. But
We're so well informed in this day and age. Compared.
Yeah, ignorance is a choice, right?
Yeah, but the challenge, I think, is that even though we are aware of something I talked about yesterday, actually, that even though we know this stuff at a surface level, when you're in it, in the thick of it, unless you've got real experience of dealing with it on a day-to-day basis, you're never really cognizant of it, never really truly aware of what's going on. And it's amazing how many people I speak to nowadays who are familiar with attachment styles, but as soon as they come to me and tell me, do you realize you were in an anxious avoidant loop, they're like, no, I wasn't. And I'm like, you were. Let me break it down for you. They're like, oh yeah, I was.
These bite-sized, I mean, I don't really use TikTok as such, but from what I'm gathering, it's like, little bite-sized things, and it can be really helpful. I love that. Is it Dr. Julie Smith who's huge on TikTok?
Yeah, I think.
I know her on Instagram, but I love her stuff. But I think we get the surface of it. From what I'm gathering, I don't know. They will get the messaging, okay, attachment styles, and maybe just what I've said here. Oh, these are the 4 attachment styles, and be like, oh yeah, I'm that one. But it goes a lot deeper. So I'll speak to you. So through my work, and definitely when I'm, with my client, I'm totally securely attached. In the rest of my life, I'm securely attached most of the time, because you never lose your core attachment. So at my core, I'm an avoidant, a heavy avoidant. And even like a few years ago when my clinical supervisor said to me, I just wasn't liking her. And my other 2 colleagues who had gone to her were getting on famously with her. And I was just like, I don't know, I'm just not feeling it. And we'll give it one more go. And then I just thought, I'll talk to her about it. So at the second session, I said, how do you experience my attachment style? And she immediately, and I was experiencing her as dismissive, avoidant. And she said to me, oh, dismissive, India. And I looked at her, I didn't like her very much. And I just then, I love her now, and I'm still working with her. And that weekend, like on Sunday, it was family day in my family. So I said to my brother, my younger brother, I said, can you believe my clinical supervisor said this to me? And he's not on an awareness journey or anything, right? He's in property and just like, he's like, okay, you carry on with your growth, etc. But an amazing guy. And he said to me, but what are you talking about? He said, we're all dismissive. And then that made me, do you see how, because I'm in it, so I sat down and I journaled on it. And I just thought, crikey, I come from generations of avoidance.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm a Sikh. And this is my theory. This is no theory. My theory, because I've thought about this long and hard, and I look at the clients who come to me. And I think because the Sikhism 500-600 years ago was actually formulated as almost a warrior race, right? That's our identity. That actually is how I raised. I am that little kid who would fall down and it'd be like, shabash, you're fine. There's my girl. So, and especially being the eldest, I almost feel like I was raised as a male almost. So I have that thing going on. And so my parents must have raised them like that. They've raised me and my brothers in this way. I've kind of then carried that on. So, and this is where it stops, because I see my son and my daughter-in-law raising our grandchildren very differently, much more aware. And I've turned around and said to my son, crikey, I was such a bad mother. Right? Because I didn't know all of this. Yeah. I was just like, So it goes back to what we said earlier, right? You do what you do with information that you have available to you at that time. When you know better, hopefully you do better. So, did I answer your question? Because have I gone off on a tangent?
No, it's absolutely fine. I think it's great to cover a lot of this stuff, because I think, like I said, and you said it as well, we are so privy to bite-sized piece of knowledge, and we get to see all this information. We start to learn more and more about this stuff, but a lot of the time we don't know how to put the pieces together, and I think that generally comes from proper guidance. And that could be someone who's a friend, it could be a coach, it could be a therapist, and that will send us in the right direction.
Well, you seem to be doing it in your coaching business. It's just like, you're aware of attachment, then you take them deeper. It's like, okay, how is this playing out in your relationship?
Exactly.
And actually, how could you do it differently? And it's a journey. And I think it's a journey till we're in the grave, right? So I'll give you another example of, I'm a therapist, I'm a mental health professional. I have mental health issues. I'm very open about that. But I've got the tools and techniques to manage them. Are they going to come up again? I've had depression and anxiety. Yeah, because life happens, but now I have the tools and now I have that vulnerability and that ability to ask for support. But with our attachment styles, we need to go deeper, not just like, the surface things that, like I've said, oh, there's 4 attachment styles and this is how it plays out. I'll give you an example how I can still go into my avoidant. So I was in a work environment when I was contracting, and these 2 people who I was hanging out with all the time, all of a sudden weren't hanging out with me, were just kind of just being very surface with me. And one day I noticed it particularly. So after I'd been with them, I went to my office and my door to my office is never closed. I closed my door and I sat at my desk. Within a minute, I was like, oh, and I literally speak to myself like yeah. And I literally had a word with myself. I went, oh, there you go. You're back in your avoidant because you're not feeling safe. You're not feeling heard, seen, included. So, sat with it, processed it, introspected, opened the door, and then showed up in my secure. So when something like that triggers you, you will revert to your core attachment. That never leaves you. So I think, and I do have clients who I work with who are dating, on their attachments. And I get a lot of anxious attachment.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, you must get this in your work. And I'm really interested to know, like, you mentioned earlier about, they date someone and they go, it doesn't work out, then they move on to the next. And I've actually said to a couple of my clients, just maybe take a breath, just practice your self-care, just like, do your journaling, do what feeds you, like nurture you. And let's talk about this in therapy, but it's almost like it's impossible. And I get it. There are a lot of variables involved, especially if you're, a woman in your early 30s and you feel that your body clock is ticking and you just kind of like have to be out there all the time. But it's in other things. It's kind of like when they say, oh, I can't make that day. And then the anxiously attached person will then give them, the whole calendar.
Yeah, the whole,
yeah. And I'm like, okay, no, when they say that, just pause a little bit, as you said, and maybe leave the ball in their court and see where that goes. And if not, then there's absolutely, we're wanting to step into secure. What would a securely attached person do? That's okay. If you're interested in them, maybe after a couple of days, text them. So it's just knowing your attachment style. Like someone like me, if I were probably in a situation, I'm just thinking what an avoidant person would do. They would be like, oh, okay, no, move on. It's okay.
Yeah.
You can't. Or if they come back at a later stage and say, oh, it's like, nope, don't deal with that. So, no, that's where it's really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I had one yesterday. It was fascinating.
Tell me.
So the person who rang me was an anxious attached person, and the person that she was with was an avoidant. It wasn't necessarily atypical. There was a lot of atypical elements about it, because the relationship started off so consistently for her. And so as an anxious attached person, she normally would have kind of been, she was a little bit like, oh, like, are they just, like, is it going a bit too fast, this person? But they were showing up and they were consistent dates and the real good stuff. And obviously I said to her, look, no one can predict what's going to happen next, right? But, if someone is treating you really well, of course, you're going to take a chance. And so don't blame yourself for that. Of course, you did the right thing. You waited to see, a little bit of consistency. This person wasn't just love bombing you. They weren't just overzealous in the initial stages. They were showing really good signs. They're a mature person. They're looking after you. So it carried on, and then of course after 3-4 months the avoidant element in the other partner kicked in, and the sabotage started kicking in, and it ended pretty much a few days ago we're talking. But what was the element that she didn't pick up on. So I had to kind of just point out, of course, look at you, what you're telling me right now. You're saying all the things that you think you should be saying. I'm the kind of person who's willing to change, to grow for someone. I would work on these things. And I said, look, where is that coming from? Is that coming from the anxious in you, that you feel like you need to, constantly change and adapt and, manipulate yourself to be for the person for the other person? That's coming from an anxious place. Again, not everyone will notice those patterns, but it's there. That's where it was rooted, and I could see it clearly. And then the interesting thing was that obviously her version of growth was that I'm growing into what someone else wants me to be. Not so grossly, not so overtly, but it was very subtle. Very subtle. And I said to her, what's interesting about your growth journey is you're doing all the things you enjoy and you think you're supposed to do, but you're not doing anything that's making you uncomfortable. A good example of this, she was asking, look, okay, I don't know when we're ready to date, but, should I speak to a couple of the people I was speaking to before and things like that? And I said, does it make you feel uncomfortable? She said, yes. I said, go for it, do it. Because growth is not what necessarily feels good and feels like always right to us. A lot of the time it's going to be the things that feel really painful.
Out of your comfort zone.
Out of your comfort zone that make you feel very uncomfortable. That's where you're going to grow the most. And then I went on to explain to her about, okay, how does she get herself a little bit out of this anxious avoidant loop? So one of the references I use often, especially for females who have an anxious attachment style, there's an old school book called Why Men Love Bitches.
And I think I've read it many moons ago.
Well, it shouldn't become anyone's Bible, but there's some good nuggets in there. It speaks a lot of truth in there. And what she will need to do as part of her growth is now become comfortable with being uncomfortable, with being pursued. Not always being the one who's ready to change, mold for the other person, but letting them change and mold for her as well, which was very uncomfortable to her. And so this was just this was a free 30-minute that turned into an hour and a half. Sometimes it just happens, right? If I'm in the mode and I'm just helping someone, it will just happen anyway.
Boundaries, Amit.
Yeah, I know. This is this is definitely my thing to work on. But sometimes I'm just like, if I'm in the zone, I'll just do it, And it was a kind of a sort of a friend of a friend. So I relaxed my rules a little bit there. But that discomfort element of putting yourself in the position to be not becoming avoidant, but becoming going on the journey to become secure, to allow herself to be pursued, to be okay with being spoiled. And again, another element of this was that she was so ingrained in her to be independent that she wouldn't even allow the other person to pay for her, even though the other person was incredibly wealthy. And I said, if that's making you uncomfortable, the thought of him supporting you, because you have it ingrained in you that I must support myself in case anything happens. And I'm like, what does it say about us when we're trying to predict the future? We're trying to almost preempt a problem. Of course, there's going to be problems. We know that. But living by that day to day, it's not healthy. It's not good for us to be in a position where we're constantly thinking about what could be going wrong.
The start of dating, it's like information gathering, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if he does want to pay for the date, then that's fine. Just see how it goes and how you feel about it. And maybe it's something that you can actually talk about at a later date.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the other extreme as well, some women are just like, well, I'm not going Dutch. And they expect the guy to pay for it, or the guy will be like, well, I go on so many dates. So, yeah, we're going to split it. And I think, as well as attachment style, it has a lot to do with other variables in how you're raised, right? And I think I've always said this is cultural, that because I'm that girl and my girlfriends are like, wow, that's really bad that you're like that. But I think my dad took care of me. I come from, and I'm not saying that this is, my dad took care of me when I was at home. Then I had an arranged marriage, went to my husband's family. Again, I didn't know how to pay a bill when I got divorced at 32. I didn't know how to do a phone contract. But then when I went into my dating life, luckily I just, attracted men who were the same as my father, good or not. That's a whole different story. But they all took care of me. And now for the last 10 years, I've consciously not dated. I've literally worked on myself and, my businesses and whatever. And now it's kind of like, oh, what's right, what's wrong? Because it's a totally different arena that we're in now.
Yeah.
There is no right or wrong.
Yeah,
it's just kind of like what's good for the both of you. And, talk about these things. I love this phrase, and I keep it on my desk. It's like, people aren't psychic, tell them.
Tell them,
but, information.
So I love that. It's so true, though.
It's true, right?
Yeah. So many things are left unsaid. And people, I'm sure this happens to you. People come to you and talk to you about something. And the first question you can ask is, well, have you just talked about it with them? They're like, no. Or I've tried, but have you explained it in the way that you've explained it to me? No.
Yeah.
And it's so true. Like, this is one of the things I talk about a lot as well. This men from Mars, women from Venus. We just have two different languages that we speak, in between the lines versus direct versus logical versus emotional. That never is going to go anywhere.
No.
That will exist for the remainder of your relationship for the rest of your life. What we've got to do is, I've got to, for my wife, I've got to learn about her in between the lines language. For my wife's got to learn about my logical reasoning, right? Yeah, and it's just such simple things, but it will always exist. As the Gottmans always say, those problems are never going anywhere. They will exist for the entirety of a relationship. It's how you start to, how you choose to handle them, how you learn to deal with them moving forward, right?
You know, you've reminded me of a story just of recently. A client of mine was talking about her mother-in-law, and it was very telling because you're talking about communication and the languages and all of this. So she said she was just moaning about her mother-in-law and said, oh, do you know, she brings the children bags of toys and my place is cluttered with them. Even last night I got home and on the kitchen table there was a bag with, a rituals bag, which is scents, etc. And so I was just listening to her talking about, and, and I said, oh, sounds like a bitch, your mother-in-law. Send her over to me with all this gifting.
Me too.
And so, but the thing is, my client's love language is words of affirmation.
Yeah.
And all she wants her mother-in-law to say to her is like, oh, you're such a good mum.
Yeah.
Or, I love the way that you are with my son, or something to that effect. So it's not for a lack of love or care, but they're missing each other in the language. So I think it's really important to actually even further into dating, or maybe it's a fun thing to do at the beginning. Say, well, what do you think your love language is? And I know a lot of people are unaware of love languages, and I used to poo-poo them years ago. But I just think it's so important, like in that example, that really highlighted to me how important it is, and the fact that our giving love language can be different to our receiving love language. And how some of us will carry a bit of guilt and shame around the fact that receiving gifts is our love language. It's okay.
And that's exactly what happened with that one I was mentioning yesterday. So not only did they have the anxious avoidant loop, they had a completely different love language of giving and receiving. So hers of receiving was quality time. His of giving was acts of service, or acts of service stroke gift giving.
Beautiful.
And they just didn't intertwine. And so he was giving love in his way, but he wasn't being received. And the way she wanted love, he wasn't able to give her. And
right.
Yeah.
For no reason, but for a lack of communication.
I think there's a lot of people out there who really, not just you, but I think a lot of people poo-poo over love languages. But honestly, I see it every single day, and every example of people I'm speaking to. When people say, oh, there's no scientific basis for love languages and things, I'm like, shut up. If you work in the profession I do, you'll see it every single day without fail.
No, we can't scientifically prove God or spirituality or a lot of that, but it's the thing. And now you bring in spirituality. There's a neuroscientist, Dr. Tara Schwartz. Is it Schwartz?
I'm listening to her book at the moment as well.
The Source. So I've got it sitting on my bookshelf, and I've just read a couple of chapters. Do you know, I love her because she literally breaks down neuroscience into layman's terms.
Yeah.
So I love her stuff. And then there's another, and she talks about manifesting and all of this kind of thing. Then Dr. Joe Dispenza.
I love Dr. Joe,
Yeah, I absolutely love his work. And I've met him, and he sent me all of his library of works. Yeah. They marry science
and spirituality, right?
And spirituality, which is why, I mean, when I first discovered Dr. Joe Dispenza years ago, it really spoke to me. And then listen to this. So, because they talk about the universe and manifesting, but in a very science-based way. So I used to work for Virgin, and I was in their VIP team, so in their premier team. So we'd always have these high-end clients and VIP movements, etc. And one fine day, we're about to go home, and this limo pulls up, and I was just looking through the window waiting to go, and I saw this chap come out, and I was like, my God, that looks like Dr. Joe Dispenza.
Yeah.
So I'm saying to my colleagues, do you think that's Dr. Joe Dispenza? Like, that's the first time I've been starstruck. I worked for Virgin for 25 years. They're really not bothered about celebrities. And nobody knew, right? So, because he's a physicist. So I was like, I'll take this one, even though I was like about to go home. So I went off and I looked at his passport and I went, it is you. And he said, yes. And I said, you know what? I love your work. And we started talking about it. And I said, you, Greg Braden, Bruce Lipton. Yeah. And he just went, you're kidding. And I was like, what? And he said, I've just been with them.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So he's just come, like, being with them last night. And I said, oh, my God, you're joking. He said they were doing something in London. So we just had a brief chat. And he was like, give me your email. Yeah. So we exchanged emails. He said, I'm going to get my secretary to, and that's how it came to be. Nice. But I kind of manifested that, right?
Yeah, of course. Of course. I love that. And I love the fact that her book as well starts talking about, marrying up, physics and spirituality, because it's something I talk about whenever I'm coaching my clients.
Not for everyone.
Yeah, but I think most people do believe it, but we're almost afraid to express it at times, but I often pre-qualify when I'm talking about this stuff. I say, look, there is far much more to prove that, say, for example, the law of attraction exists than to disprove it. And there are scientists, countless scientists across the world who talk about this daily, and she's one, and there's many others as well. Dr. Joe Dispenza being another, Bruce Lipton, and the whole host of people, right? So when I talk about this, I just say, look, in case, if you don't, I'm not here to convert your spiritual beliefs, but at the base of most spiritual beliefs, there is something similar to, say, for example, manifestation, understanding the power of prayer, getting deliverance on what we want. And there's a process, and there's almost like a scientific process. So let me talk you through it as I understand it, that may help you get to where you want. That video I did the other day talking about, I don't know if you saw it at all. I put it on my Instagram about the third person versus first person. So one thing I had this realization when I started reading Tara Swartz's book, that often in my manifestations or in my visions in my mind, I was very often, not always, but I never really sort of fully thought about this, but often I was in third person.
Okay.
So instead of me being in the vision, I was observing the vision. And therefore, this is why in my life, I've seen a lot of people come and go in my life who've achieved everything that I've always wanted. And I realized that part of it is because my vision is such that I'm seeing someone else. I think it's me, but it's someone else actually getting all these things. So I've started putting myself in the first person in each of these visions. So if I want something, let's say I have a beautiful vision to be on the Diary of a CEO podcast. Instead of seeing it as I see it on a YouTube screen, I'm actually sitting there opposite Stephen. I'm putting myself in that position where I'm seeing him question me. I'm seeing him asking me.
You're feeling it, right?
I'm feeling it in first person mode. It seems so obvious and so simple, but yet I've been doing this mistake for 33 plus years, and I've only just been able to really articulate that, see it for exactly what it is. But, it's these little things that we start to learn from reading all these people who marry up some of these concepts that have been around for such a long time, but marry them up through science, through spirituality, through all the modalities that we use, whether it's therapy, coaching, whatever, and we can then use that as tools to help us achieve the end goals that we want.
Because we've got the tools now. We didn't used to have all of this imaging equipment, etc. As great as it is now to actually measure brain waves. And it's like, we think of breath work. We think of it as like yogis breathing and people who do yoga who do breath work. But actually, we now know, and it's very commonly known, that it actually can help to regulate or stimulate your central nervous system. I think that's just, I love the science-based stuff. And I will never bring in spirituality or anything universe-based unless my client brings it in. I'll be like, oh, tell me about that. And then if they're willing to go there, then I'll go there. But other than that, just
beautiful.
Quite evidence-based.
Well, I have absolutely loved this conversation. It's gone so quick. We're definitely going to have a part 2. Let me do something I don't normally do. Let's finish off on one of these, and then I'm going to ask all your details so that people can get in touch with you. Let me give it a bit of a shuffle, because I often find that sometimes some of the same questions crop up. So let's see if we can give these.
I think I should ask you one.
Oh, well, you're more than welcome to. Let's do one more of you, and then we can do one quick one of me, all right? Here we go. All right, say stop wherever.
Stop.
Okay. Oh, brilliant. Okay. Interesting, because you kind of touched upon this. Have you ever looked into your family tree? And if so, how far back did it go?
Crikey, yeah, I did. And actually, it was a part of my diploma when I did the attachment, and the conversations that I had with my mum, because that was a part of it as well, were amazing. How far did it go? And it was surprising, because I couldn't go that far back. And I spoke to my uncle, my mum. Where did it go to? Great-grandparents, that was it.
Okay.
That was it. And then my friend...
Have you ever been curious to see what your lineage and how far back it goes? And
do you know, it doesn't really interest me. Is that the avoidant in me? It really doesn't interest me. It's kind of like the people,
who've had an impact on you.
Who've had an impact on me, but it was nice. It is. It's really interesting. And I wish I could go further back and find out, exactly what our lineage is. But it's okay that I didn't. And I didn't make too much of a concerted effort, to be honest. Whereas my Scottish friend David, he saw me doing this and he did his, and his went back. I mean, you should see here, it went to an A3 page. And I wonder if that's because, I was actually born at home in a little village in India. So I wonder if there were records and whether that's got something to do with it. Does that answer your question?
It does, indeed. Go for it. Feel free to ask me one as well.
I'm not a good shuffler.
Oh, don't worry.
I'm just going to do this.
I will say it.
Not
Right,
so
go for it.
bad.
However you want to do it, it's
And I'll
absolutely
do
fine.
tarot style.
Okay. Okay. Cool. I'll do it this way. Then let's go here. Let's go try and go deep into the pack. One sticky one.
Okay.
Go for it.
Let me have a look. Oh, it's a nice deck of cards. If you were a cocktail, what would it be?
It's so funny.
And what would be your signature ingredient?
It's so funny because yours was the dessert question, mine's the
Yeah.
cocktail one.
A swap.
Yeah. If I was a cocktail, it would probably be something like. Did you ever used to watch Only Fools and Horses?
Yes,
Del Boy always had these cocktails, funky cocktails, but he always had to have the bright umbrella on top of it. So I could be any I don't drink, so it'd have to be a mocktail. I could be any mocktail, but so long as it comes with a nice bright umbrella on top.
I
think there's a part of me that is like that. There's a little there's a little bit of bloom in me that sometimes I hide away, but do you know what I mean? It's just it's there, and it kind of adds something to wherever it is, even if it doesn't mean much, it adds flourish to it. It adds just a little bit of
You have
panache
that about
flair.
you, yeah.
So I could be any mocktail. If it's a pina colada or what's the other one, the mango or coconut one. Yeah, actually pina colada, with a nice bright umbrella. That'll probably be me.
Okay.
Yeah. Signature ingredient though. I think a nice mocktail with lemonade or something. Yeah,
Lemonade.
Lemonade always adds a good. It's got that little tangy and sweet mix. I think again that very much probably defines me.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, a bit salty and sweet at the same time. Maybe it's why I like salt and sweet popcorn.
Oh, I love that. I love sweet. Yeah.
Well, listen, I've loved this conversation. Where can people reach out to you if they want to connect with you or just speak to you or follow you on social media or maybe even also get some work done with you? Work done? You sound like a plastic surgeon.
Yeah, I sound like nice. So my website is indiagill.com, just my name. They can find me on the British Association of Counsellors and Psychotherapists. They can find me on Counselling Directory. Where else can they find me? I'm not huge on social media. I am on Instagram. I think it's India Kaur Gill or India Gill. Same on Facebook. I think I have a account on Snapchat and TikTok, which I don't really use very often. But yeah, mostly on Instagram.
Nice.
And it's just India Gill. My name is my brand.
Yeah.
And as of next week, you'll be able to find me on my podcast. So I'm launching a podcast.
Beautiful.
Would you believe?
And what's it going to be called?
Well, it's just the India Gill podcast.
Nice.
And people keep asking, well, why are you starting a podcast? Like, what business has a 60-year-old Indian woman got starting a podcast? And I think specifically, Amit, for that reason. So if there was a hard way to do things, your girl here would find it.
Yeah.
Right? And it's only in the last decade that I've got into my property business. I've got my private practice. I've stopped contract and all of this kind of thing. So I think, wow, I really have a method now, have this strategy. And all of the experiences that I've been through, like very colourful life I've led. The highs have been euphoric and the lows have been virtually suicidal. So I just think there's a lot of learning, and I like to think, an element of wisdom and just a zest for life.
Nice.
And then marrying that, it's not a therapy podcast. I am a therapist, but it's definitely not a therapy podcast, although elements of that will obviously creep in. And that's where people can find me.
Beautiful. Well, I've loved this conversation. I
Me
definitely think there will be a
too.
part 2 at some point in the very near future. So
would
really
love
enjoyed
that.
this. So thank you for being a wonderful guest. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to the Feel Inspired podcast or watching, and I will see you on the next episode. Thank you.